On August 1st, 1944, the Polish resistance gambled everything, rising in open revolt against the Nazis as Soviet armies waited just across the river. For 63 days, surrounded and isolated, Warsaw fought alone, risking annihilation to control its own fate. But why did the city's bid for freedom yield only devastation, betrayal, and a new map of Europe? The answer begins with a single order. In September 1939, Poland vanished from the map. German troops marched in from the west, Soviet forces closed from the east. Within weeks, Warsaw fell under Nazi control, while the Soviets seized the rest. Yet beneath the surface, the city refused to surrender its identity. Secret classrooms replaced shuttered schools. Underground presses printed banned newspapers. The Polish government in exile, now in London, directed a shadow state back home, complete with courts, police, and a vast resistance network. By 1944, nearly 400,000 men and women belonged to the Armia Krajowa, the Home Army, making it the largest underground force in occupied Europe. This resistance was not only military, it was a bet on survival, on the hope that Poland could re-emerge after the war as a sovereign nation. Every act of sabotage or clandestine meeting was a statement. Poland still existed, even if only in the hearts of its people and the corridors of the underground. But the memory of betrayal ran deep. In 1940, Soviet security forces executed over 22,000 Polish officers and intellectuals in the Katyn forest and elsewhere, an act that shattered any illusion of trust between Poles and Moscow. The underground knew that when the war's front lines returned to Warsaw, the city would have to choose: wait for liberation by the Soviets, or rise first and stake a claim for an independent future. The decision would demand everything from those who remained. On the last day of July 1944, Warsaw's fate balanced on a rumor and a decision. Soviet tanks, it was said, had reached the city's eastern suburb of Praga. The thunder of artillery echoed from the far bank of the Vistula. In the cramped rooms of a hidden headquarters, General Tadeusz Komorowski and Colonel Antoni Krusiel weighed their options. Reports of German units retreating, Soviet radio calls urging Poles to rise, and the hope that a free Warsaw could greet the Allies all pressed for immediate action. Yet the Home Army's own assessments warned of shortages. Barely 1 in 10 fighters had a rifle, ammunition would last just days, and German garrisons still held key strongpoints. Late that afternoon, Krusiel arrived with urgent news. Soviet armor was supposedly entering Praga. Waiting any longer, he argued, might mean missing the chance to act before the Soviets imposed their own order. Komorowski gave the order. At 5 p.m. the next day, the uprising would begin. Couriers slipped through the city, passing coded messages to commanders and street leaders. Young fighters, some barely out of school, readied pistols, grenades, and hope. Maps spread across kitchen tables showed the city's districts: Zolibor, Śródmieście, Mokoto, each assigned its own target. In one apartment, a teenage courier named John folded his armband and checked his borrowed revolver. He did not know if the Soviets would arrive in hours or days, or if help would come at all. But at W hour, he and thousands of others would step from the shadows, betting everything that Warsaw could be Polish once more. At dawn on August 5th, German SS and police units swept into the Wola district with a single order: kill everyone. For 3 days, the streets became an assembly line of death. Men, women, and children were forced from their homes, lined up along walls or courtyards, and shot in groups. Hospitals were set ablaze with patients and doctors trapped inside. Machine guns rattled on every corner, and bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. By the evening of August 7th, as many as 40,000 civilians lay dead, more than the total British losses during the entire Blitz. A survivor later recalled, "They herded us into a yard. The first row fell. I closed my eyes and waited. For most, there was no escape." German units, including the notorious Derla-Wanger Brigade, moved methodically from block to block, looting what they could and burning the rest. The massacre was not a chaotic outburst, but a deliberate campaign to terrorize the city into submission. In Wola, the cost of resistance was measured in entire families erased within hours. their only crime living in a city that dared to rise. German command in Warsaw responded to the uprising with overwhelming force and precision. Reinforcements poured in under SS Gruppenführer Heinz Rheineffarth, swelling German strength to over 25,000. Armored columns, including Panzer IV tanks and assault guns, rolled down shattered boulevards, while half-tracks and flamethrower vehicles cleared barricades with fire. Artillery batteries on both sides of the river unleashed daily barrages, targeting insurgent strongholds with 150mm shells and Nebelwerfer rockets that collapsed entire city blocks. Luftwaffe Stuka bombers circled above, dropping tons of explosives onto marked hospitals and crowded tenements alike. German doctrine divided Warsaw into isolated pockets. Combat groups advanced methodically, cutting off home army units from each other and from any hope of outside relief. Engineers followed, planting charges to demolish buildings and clear lines of fire. Where resistance lingered, flamethrowers and satchel charges left only smoldering ruins. The city became a battlefield of fire and rubble, every advance measured not just in meters, but in the number of blocks reduced to ash. Against this arsenal, the Home Army's light arms and homemade grenades offered little answer. The struggle for Warsaw was no longer a battle of equals, but a contest of survival against a machine built for annihilation. Across the Vistula, the thunder of Soviet artillery faded into an uneasy silence. In early August, Soviet newspapers like Pravda praised the courage of Warsaw's fighters, calling them patriots battling fascism. Yet behind the headlines, Stalin's army stopped short of the city, holding position on the eastern bank. Requests from London and Washington for Soviet airfields to support Allied supply drops were denied on August 14th. Polish and British cables, like those filed in the FO371 series, recorded growing frustration as pleas for help went unanswered. In Warsaw, insurgents listened to Soviet radio broadcasts urging resistance, but watched as Red Army tanks idled in Praga. No armored columns crossed the river, no coordinated attack materialized. Only on September 16th did the Soviets allow a token airdrop, 50 pistols, 2 machine guns, and a handful of crates. Far too little, far too late. The map of the city showed a front line frozen at the river's edge. For the Home Army, the message was clear: Warsaw would receive no relief from the east. The fate of the uprising was now sealed by the silence beyond the water. On October 2nd, 1944, the last Polish commanders met their German counterparts to sign the capitulation. The agreement granted Home Army fighters prisoner of war status, offering a measure of protection under the Geneva Convention. Nearly 20,000 to 25,000 insurgents laid down their arms, many exhausted and wounded, while tens of thousands of civilians crowded the battered streets waiting for evacuation. The cost was staggering. By then, as many as 200,000 civilians and 25,000 resistance fighters had died. The city itself was a hollow shell. Just 3 days later, on October 5th, 1944, German authorities received direct orders from Berlin. Warsaw was to be erased. Demolition squads moved from block to block, planting explosives, setting fires, and reducing entire neighborhoods to rubble. By the time the last charges were set, almost 85% of the city's buildings had been destroyed. The capital of Poland, once vibrant and proud, was left as a field of ruins. When Soviet troops finally entered Warsaw on January 17, 1945, they found little more than empty streets and shattered walls. The leadership of the Home Army, those who had survived, were arrested or disappeared into Soviet prisons. The uprising's defeat had cleared the ground not just for a new city, but for a new order, one that would answer to Moscow, not London. For those who had fought and lost, the cost was not only measured in the dead, but in the erasure of a nation's hope for freedom on its own terms. Warsaw's ruins remain a warning. When alliances fracture and silence falls, the fate of a nation can be sealed in days. Today, as borders shift and powers compete, the cost of abandonment echoes across Europe. The question endures: who will stand alone and who will answer the call?